Have you ever learned a trading strategy or technique from an online guru, felt super excited about it, and then have it completely fail when you try it? Perhaps even worse, that exciting new guru strategy may in fact have racked up more painful losses for you. Now, the reality is that most strategies and techniques taught by supposed trading gurus have zero edge in the real world. But what you may not know is that even those that do have edge, and they're out there if you know where to look for them, those strategies will still lose you money if you're not aware of the number one hidden trading mistake. This mistake is responsible for more losses than we can count, and we'd estimate that the vast majority of independent traders are regularly making it. What's more, if you don't stop making it, it's virtually impossible to become consistently profitable. So don't miss this crucial video from a proprietary desk in New York City.
Garrett, one of the traders on the desk, and I have been talking about this topic for a while, mainly as we've started to add plays to our playbook, things that we learned from other traders on the desk. There is this idea that really this is a hidden trading mistake that I know we've made. I also know that it's probably made by more traders than we think. So we thought it was really important to bring this topic to light and to share it with you guys today. So Garrett and I are going to have a little bit more of a relaxed conversation than we typically do about this stuff, but there are points that we really want to make sure we hit home here. What we've seen is as we try and build our playbooks, whether it's for new market regimes or different environments, or really just enhance our capability to execute on the opportunities we're provided each day. What we've seen and the number one mistake that is commonly made that really people don't even realize they're making is learning the setup is just not enough. You know, you think, okay, I'm going to learn this new setup and I'm going to be able to execute it. I understand exactly, the basis of the setup. Maybe you've learned it or you've discovered it or you've learned it from somebody else. The reality is when that occurs, a lot of times you actually won't make money doing what somebody else has already done. Has that been your experience, Garrett?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key to what you just said is that it's not enough, right? Like it doesn't mean their setup's bad. It doesn't mean it doesn't work. But there's a lot more that goes into getting great at trading a setup, AKA making money, than just like hearing about a play and understanding sort of like, okay, like I'm going to buy wedge breakouts now or, whatever it is.
Yep. And that's the thing. It really is kind of a universal idea. Some of the setups we talk about on the desk are as simple as a wedge breakout. And it's really easy to say, I know exactly what to do. But unless you've kind of taken it a little bit further, which are the steps that we'll make sure to cover in this video, how we take those things further. We don't like to just lay out a mistake and say, it's a mistake. We actually want to talk through how are we doing this on the desk? What are the steps that we're taking, the concrete steps that we take every time we learn a new trade setup? And what's our process for making it our own so that we can ultimately be making money consistently with that setup? We've really seen trader after trader kind of just take rip after rip after rip after they've learned setups. Just because technically you understand it doesn't really make it a good setup for you. A lot of times what you're missing is actually the context around that setup. And we have a process for how we're going to lay out that context, how we're going to identify the opportunities that are really the best for you. And so I'm excited to kind of get into this and see.
If you want to learn 3 real-world setups that our professional traders use, including the simple but highly effective setup that we teach all of our new traders, and the setup that turned one of our traders into a 7-figure big money earner, check out the free online trading workshop that we're currently running. This is a 100% free, intensive workshop where you're going to learn more in a couple of hours than from years of online education. So don't miss it.
A couple ways that we want to preface this entire conversation. We do understand that the term furu has been thrown around a lot. There are people out there who really don't have edge in what they're trading. It's sad that they're able to build a following and be able to articulate an idea that makes sense. But at the end of the day, they don't have edge in what they're doing. We're not talking about those traders today. What we're talking about is truly traders who have established track records. They understand the context of the trade that they're making. They understand the setup that they're making, and they've proven that they can make money consistently doing that. Learning a good setup from a good trader who actually makes money in that setup, oftentimes actually is still not enough for people to just adopt what the other person's doing. And it's really easy to try and do what the other person's doing and consistently lose money, or even just not really make a lot of money doing what the other person's doing. It's just super easy to trade the right setup the wrong way. What are some ways that you can think of that you would trade the right setup the wrong way?
Well, I mean, like every single setup is easy to trade the wrong way, right? Because like a lot of the times when you learn a setup, it comes with this huge point of, okay, like when do I trade this setup, right? Like that's bigger than most people think. Yeah. In fact, it's probably more important than the setup itself, right? So it's like, when do I trade? And then even if I'm trading it in like the best situation ever, how do I trade it? Yeah. Like where do I put my stop?
Position? Yeah. When you enter the position, what sort of price action could go in your favor, and what's acceptable for it to give you the clue, the indication that setup is broken, that you actually have something else that's presenting itself. Exactly to your point, where do I move my stop? When do I move my stop? Those are context questions in a lot of situations. And the reality is we're talking less and less on this about scalping, because scalping tends to be more cut and dry. There tends to be more you understand exactly what should happen in that trade. That tends to be the most concrete amount of information. There are scalps that will require a lot more of the finesse and things like that, a lot more understanding of the context. But really, if you have the context of a very specific scalp, and we've talked about this a lot lately, actually, on the desk, even in scalping, you're looking for 4 or 5 checks in your favor even before you have a scalp. So when we're talking about what we're talking about today, it's not necessarily about scalping, which is more rules based, and much more about anything that's outside of that. So move to move trades, trade to hold trades. Those are the things that when you enter the position, you typically have the least amount of information about how the trade's going to play out. And you really do have to adjust your strategy a little bit depending on how the trade is playing out. So that's an easy mistake to make of, I understand what to do. I don't understand the context around why I'm doing it. And therefore, I don't understand really how to do what I need to do in order to make a lot of money in this trade.
Yeah. And I think the key, something that we're going to cover here, is the process between learning about a setup and then getting great at it, right? And it's actually no different than any other skill. Like if you're a basketball player and you're working on your game and your coach shows you a spin move, right? So now like he teaches you the footwork, he says this is to beat your man and score a point. Like now okay, technically I know how to do a spin move, right? But does that mean that I've practiced it enough to know exactly how that footwork feels to me, exactly when to apply it, like in terms of what does the defender have to show me in order to beat them and to get to the hole? Do I pull up for jump shot after it works, or do I go all the way to the rack? Like it's really no different, right? So it's like a lot of people with trading, I think for some reason they just think it's like, oh, someone told me something and now I've got the key, right? But there's a process.
And that's the interesting thing. We're fortunate on our desk, but I think in the community, there are some amazing traders out there who are willing to share their edge. But it's really tough to just take exactly what they did. And to Garrett's point, it's really tough to just learn it and say, I got it. We're good. Let's roll with it, because the end result is ultimately you lose money. And that can be a very painful lesson. It's not I'm missing a shot or I get a shot blocked. It's you're losing money. That's a painful lesson. So here's the cycle of trade development we've come up with for our desk. So, the first step is observe. you really want to observe what's working and ideally reach out to the people that are trading well. Understand what setup is working for them, understand where their edge is coming from, ask them questions about that and just observe what they're doing. The observational part of all this is a huge first step because you really do have to observe what is working. That's before anything else. It would be like watching film and seeing, oh, that spin move's working. Like, okay, I've observed that is working. I've observed that in the market in our case. So then you get to the next step.
Yeah, learning. I mean, in a way, this is part of every step. But once you observe something that works, I mean, you got to go talk to people, right? You got to go, like, if you see someone do something that's great that interests you, like, one of the best ways to learn is just to go up and ask them or write them an email or however you can start a conversation. I mean, for me, like, I always have at least one person, most of the time multiple people who I'm talking to at once in any given like time period, like week or month, about a specific setup. And this isn't just about the market. Like, what do you think about the market? It's like we are discussing this very specific setup almost every day.
And that's where a lot of that learning comes in. And we've talked about it a ton on the desk, and there's a ton of research about it. Different people learn a little differently. So maybe somebody just wants to journal about it every day. Maybe somebody wants to talk with other traders about it every day. Maybe somebody just wants to watch tape on it every day. Maybe somebody just wants to visualize it every day. Those are all different ways to learn, but you really do. That's where that skill that you bring as an individual of, I know I learn really quickly by getting these reps in, matters. The most important thing, though, is you have to be getting the reps in to get the learning. It has to be a habit, which the reason why is because this feeds into our next part of the cycle of trade development. The next part is your ability to filter, right? So you've observed this setup. You've learned about this setup. Now you have to filter.
Yeah, and really what that means is figuring out within the setup that you like, that you've learned about, where do I really want to apply this? Like, how do I get into the best situations and how do I remove all of the unfavorable situations? Because every setup has these things. In fact, some setups will work in an entire market regime and then not work in an entire other market regime. So you might have a great setup in your playbook that you don't even trade for a whole year. And I know that a lot of people are going through that right now because we're in such a different regime than we were, last year. So filtering is like asking for me, it's asking the question, how do I put myself in the best situations with this setup? And how do I eliminate all of those unfavorable situations?
And for me, it's more actually the inverse of that. I ask myself the question, how do I eliminate the unfavorable situations? Any card, and we've talked about this a lot, especially with Lance on our desk, is, if you look at the expectancy of all the hands in poker, your expectancy looks like this. It's basically flat and then almost vertical. And so the way I approach this, and it's different for different traders, which is why it's nice we're having this dialogue, but it's different for different traders because, I think about how do I eliminate all of those like slightly positive expectancies and just like cut it off at some point. So my filtering process is entirely about cutting off everything that doesn't work or isn't like A+ first, and then just let that last little bit be there. Where Garrett's doing a different approach, which is actually really good, which is how do I identify what those things are, and then I'll work backwards from there. So there isn't really a right way to do it, but there's a right way for you probably to do it. And that's a bit of your personality as well. Once you've observed, learned, and then done a lot of filtering, that's the first time you can start to adopt a setup and make it your own. So, Garrett's actually done this recently, and that's what sort of inspired the video. So help us understand a little bit about how you're adopting what you've observed, learned, and then filtered.
Yeah. So, once I'm identifying the situations that I want to be in and the bad trades, right? And we kind of understand like how we want to apply the setup. Then there's this whole question of like, how do I trade it, right? Because once I'm there, right? Like once I'm on the court, I got to know exactly what to do. And so there's a lot of, for me, a lot of studying of like, how do these moves usually work? Like how do the stocks act when it's working? How should they be acting? Where should they trade? Where should they not trade? How quickly should they trade? What do these moves look like? And so that gives me a very good framework of how I want to trade it. Where do I want to put my stop? Where are my targets? Just in terms of the idea of risk reward, and so from there, you can start trading it, right? So when you adopt it, that's you're starting to trade it, and the learning process doesn't necessarily stop there. But now at least you have a much better handle on, what you're doing before you start like putting capital to work.
And that's where we kind of think about it like, you put another tool in your toolbox or whatever it is. It's just you understand the situations that you will use that. And once you've understood the situations, then you can go to the market and you feel a little more armed with, oh, this situation is presented to me today. Great, that's an opportunity. I've now adopted this into my playbook. I have another thing that I can do that I know has some edge. I filtered out the times that the edge is not going to be present. I've been able to filter and find those times where the edge is actually very present. And I can start to put that capital to risk. I can start to make that trade. I can adopt that as a part of my playbook. So when it's presented to me, I have something to do there. It really becomes a tremendous opportunity. But on our desk and really kind of this, if we go back to that like grow, boop, kind of approach, a lot of it comes in the adopt and advance part. And advance is really the next goal of any of the traders on our desk. If you've adopted something, you're consistently profitable with it, there's still this huge step that you can take, and that's to advance the strategy. And so Garrett's going to share a little bit about how he's working to advance that strategy right now.
Yeah, so I mean, once you have a setup that's working, I mean, the question becomes, right, like, how do I do this bigger? How do I make more money doing this? How do I do it more? There might not be an answer for that, but if there is, you should find it, right? So for me, those are the questions I'm asking myself at that point. And then, you're kind of revisiting all these previous questions, seeing if you can do any of them better. And then, you're sort of reverse engineering trades, right? Like you see a really great trade. I think a great exercise for me, something that really helps me, is just taking a trade and reverse engineering it and being like, how could I have made, twice as much as I did? Yeah. Like, what were the simplest, easiest changes I could have made that would have amplified this trade for me?
But again, we're not trying to do that until it's already adopted, until you're already seeing the consistency with it. If you try and do that too early in the process, you're actually probably going to miss the point of that initial trade. If you're trying to get too perfect and think, how can I make more money? You're just jumping ahead. And really the goal is consistency. And that's with traders that are developing on our desk. That's whenever you bring a new trade into your playbook. The goal is consistency first, because if you have consistency, then you can build. And almost every time there's a way to actually magnify your reward potential in the right situations without really increasing your risk. But you need the consistency first in order to do that. So now we're going to go through a quick example to kind of show how these all come into play. So, Garrett was nice enough to put together this idea. I'm taught to buy a wedge breakout from my favorite trader who I know has edge in buying wedge breakouts. That's what he does. And he told me, hey, listen, just trade wedge breakouts and you'll be great. I'm successful doing it, so you should do the same. The first question is, well, I've been trading wedge breakouts for a while. How come I'm not making money with this edge? So that kind of is that first part, and Garrett's going to help us understand a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I chose a wedge breakout because it's a super simple example, right? It's like it's a pattern that a lot of people know. I mean, I think of it as a tactic. It's not like a complete play, but it's a very great tactic to get involved in something, right? So it's a really effective setup in the right situations. And so, if you're not making money trading this, and I've asked myself this question, before in my development, and what I want to ask myself immediately is how can I apply this setup to the best situations, to the correct situations? Like maybe I'm doing the right thing with this. Maybe I'm seeing these wedges, but I'm not trading the right ones. It's very possible, right? So there are 3 Tesla wedge breakout examples that I put together, and I chose Tesla because we all love Tesla. And these are 3 intraday patterns. These are all 1-minute charts. And this is sort of like zoomed into the wedge. Each starts at 9:30 in the morning. And then we get the consolidation and then the breakout, right? And so in terms of looking at it in this way, like they all look somewhat similar, right? It's hard to sort of discern between all of them, but they all are very different when you start to break down the characteristics of each trade. So if we go to the next slide, we're actually going to start with example 3, the third one, and we'll work backwards. So this actually was a couple days ago. So if anyone trades Tesla, they might remember this. But the characteristics of this trade were that Tesla was coming into resistance. So it was below resistance. And if you can see that yellow line at the top of the chart, like that was a very big area of supply on the chart a few days ago. In fact, it still is. We'd had a 3-day run into this move. There was no catalyst, and it was doing about 1.5 RVol, which is, it's okay because it's over 1. That's pretty good, but it's nothing exceptional, especially with no catalyst. And I actually traded this. It was a move-to-move trade for me. It was kind of a very nimble trade where I knew that if it stalled out at that level, I wanted to get out. But was this an A++ setup? For me, absolutely not. And you could see that it hit that level of supply, tested a few times, and started to roll over, right? So we're not going to get a whole lot out of this wedge breakout, right? We're going to get one move, and then we have to be very careful. And so, Jeff, if we go to the next slide, we'll see something completely different. And there's a reason for this. So this wedge occurred above a key level on a day where Tesla had announced delivery numbers that exceeded expectations and an entrance to China, right? I think this was in 2019. This was like, a few years ago. And it was holding all-time highs doing 3 RVol. So it had a catalyst, it was holding above a key level, and it was doing elevated volume. In fact, it had 2 catalysts. And so the same wedge pattern breakout had way more follow through in this case. In fact, you could have made a trade to hold out of this inflection point. So imagine the risk reward you could have gotten on that wedge if you identified the fact that this could actually trend all day. So that, to me, is way different than the previous example and really highlights the difference between understanding how to trade a wedge pattern and then just like kind of going in and like just buying every wedge you see.
Yep. And the context around those two is really ultimately sort of that secret, that the mistake that a lot of people actually make. And they don't even realize they're making it, and a wedge is a super simplified version, but we do the same thing with super complex trade ideas that we put on involving spread trades or involving risk arb trades that we'll do on the desk. People hear about a super complex strategy that we're doing on the desk. Somebody will learn about a complex options hedge strategy, and somebody will teach it to them, and they'll share what they know, but they won't actually work through these steps. They won't observe that strategy. They won't actually learn it. They certainly won't filter out, kind of the circumstances that aren't really that favorable from a risk-reward perspective, and they've kind of stopped their development process there, right? They've stopped at observe and learn. If they don't even do the filtering, there's no real way to adopt that into your playbook, right? That's what we're talking about here. The traders that are really, really, really good at getting better, and ultimately those are the most consistent traders. Those are the traders that adjust to the market environments. Those are the traders that have the most fun when they're trading because they're able to just let things fall into their lap. They understand what are the different situations that could fall into my lap today. Okay, I've got a playbook that when I get one of those situations to fall into my lap, here's exactly what I'm looking for to just have it hit me right between the eyes. And I can take that trade all day. And I might be doing 3 or 4 or 5 different things, or even one thing really, really well. But, that's kind of all I need right now. And then I can keep growing. So, the most traders stop after the observe and the learn part. They never get to the filter part. But if you observe, learn, filter, adopt, and then advance, you'll be able to do exactly what Garrett just talked about. You'll be able to understand, all right, maybe I'll take this trade, but this is like, maybe like a B setup for me, but it's fine. Versus like, this is an A+ setup for me, or an A++ setup for me. I know not only do I need to increase my risk in this trade, but I also need to change my hold strategy because of the opportunity. I don't want to give up a 10-to-1 risk reward because I've made 1-to-1 risk reward on it. Understanding how to do that, it's just going to add so much, it's going to take away so much variance from your P&L, because you're going to make the most in the best strategies, and you'll actually lose the least, or kind of put yourself in a position where you're going to lose the least in the ones that aren't really that good. Observing and learning just isn't enough. But if you filter, adopt, and advance, those can really help you grow as a trader.
One more Tesla wedge breakout, same thing, right? Above a key level. This was day 2 after an earnings beat for Arval, and it held above that day 1 high, which was huge, right? So, if I just had this data in front of me and I was studying wedge patterns, I would start to say to myself, okay, like what I want to do is be buying wedges above key levels that have a catalyst doing elevated RVOL, more so than the first example that we saw, right? And so you start to make those different differentiations. And that's what, for me, that's what helps me get better at these, right? Because I'm putting myself in a better situation with this setup.
And you're magnifying your potential. The P&L return on a wedge breakout with the catalyst and doing elevated RVOL. Elevated RVOL on the desk is typically 3+ RVOL. That's what we view as elevated. And then holding above a high, breaking out of a range before the wedge develops. You're talking about, your P&L expectancy on that is so much different than trading any other wedge breakout, than trading a wedge breakout in the middle of a range, than trading a wedge breakout without a catalyst. Those checks in your favor are really important, and understanding what checks are the right checks for you is just absolutely critical. I know we've thrown a lot at you, but we want to give you something that you can take home and really understand, what are the daily habits that you can be doing to help build your playbook? What are the things that will help you get on this path to adopting things? The number one habit that we see traders doing on the desk is a book of charts. And I have a book of charts, and it's really anytime I see something interesting, I just take a screenshot of it, put it in a PowerPoint, and I save it. And then, through the day or over the weekend, I'll go through and I'll review the charts. And that'll just kind of help me understand, okay, what are the things that I'm looking for? Is that similar to what you do?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. I think it's a pretty common theme on our desk for people to just, you see an interesting chart, you see something that looks good, you just put it into your book of charts. The other thing, and this kind of is something that some people do just to observe. Other people do it as part of the filtering process, but it's a really important thing that really can help a lot of people if you do it every day. Data spreadsheets. So Garrett's going to help us understand a little bit more about how he uses the data in coming up with these ideas.
So this is an example of a data spreadsheet that I have put together over the last few months. And, the whole thing is not shown here. The point is not to look at the numbers and understand them. It's very personal to what I'm working on, but it's here to show that there's value in recording data that you're interested in about a setup. And so on the left, you can see every ticker down the left-hand side, and that's each example that goes across. And so if you look at each color in each column, you can see, like, I'm studying the volume of each of these setups. I'm studying the ATR moves of each of these setups, the duration, like how many days does this occur on, the RVOL, like things like that. So, to me, I'm asking myself the question, like, how can I best trade this? And what are the characteristics of these trades that really, really work? And then I can go through and I can sort them by RVOL, and I can see if the moves are bigger, if the volume is bigger. I can see if the move lasts for more days, if the volume is bigger. Things like that. And I start to wrap my head around it a little bit more. And so not only does that help me come up with some ideas on how to trade it, but it also gives me some confidence that I've studied this thing, right? So like if I'm going to be putting more risk on something, like I want to really know the characteristics of what I'm trading.
And it allows you to do two things. One, you have this resource, and Garrett's talked about that, of it gives you the confidence. But two, it allows you to be a little dynamic with your idea generation too. Because what if you happen to notice, oh, okay, all of these things line up on a regular basis, and those are my best situations. That might actually present an opportunity that you didn't even think about before. So, making sure, you can use TraderView for this. You can use Excel for this. You could use, even just handwrite it in a notebook if you needed to. But, you really do want to be tracking your data on these trades so that you can start to formulate an idea of really how your playbook could evolve using this data. The third habit that we use to help build our playbook and really kind of help us as traders is trader conversations. We're very fortunate. We have a team of I think about 60 traders now, both in-house and remote. We're all connected via the Skype or Discord or Zoom calls. Every day we're talking about trades. We're talking about trade ideas. Garrett mentioned, he's learning a new setup, and he's talking specifically about that setup with one or more traders. Our conversations are wide ranging, but we're doing them every single day. Do you mind sharing a little bit about what a conversation about a specific setup might be? Because a lot of times I think people think we're talking about a specific stock, but really we're talking about a range of outcomes out of a specific setup. And that becomes the conversation. Is that right?
Yeah. So a conversation might go like, I'll bring up an example that we saw today that I thought was that setup, right? And I'll say the few things that I thought made it that setup. I'll talk about the characteristics of it that I thought made it a good play, right? I might say, hey, they beat earnings, they guided higher, there's a new product, it gapped up beyond the expected move, it's doing at least 5 RVOL. I really like this. And the trader might say, yeah, I see all those things. This definitely stands out to me, but it's gapping into a bunch of supply on the daily chart. Did you see that? Like, how much do you value that? And then we'll have a conversation about like how much that matters, right? And then I might say, I still think it could go higher, but he might say, hey, but look at these 3 examples from last month where they gapped up, they had great earnings, they came into supply, and then they sold off. Like, do you really think we're in the market for that right now? So, and then you start to hash through this stuff, and you might go back and study those things that trader mentioned and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it's never outcome focused. It's never like, oh, that trade worked, that's great, or oh, that trade didn't work. It's what about that specific setup should we learn, adopt, or just completely discount because it doesn't really matter. Those conversations on our desk are incredibly specific, and they're not vague, and they're not outcome focused. They're really process oriented. So that when we say trader conversations, it's not just telling everybody, hey, listen, I crushed this setup. It's really talking through the specifics of what you're looking at. Another thing that we do every day, especially some traders, and Garrett's probably one of the better ones on the desk of doing this, but there's certainly a lot that do it, is reverse engineering your top trades. So, you mentioned it earlier in the video. Can you kind of talk us through what you do specifically with that?
Yeah, so I'll grab the chart. I'll look at my entry. I'm assuming this is something I traded, but it doesn't have to be. It can be something I didn't trade. And I'll look at the move. I'll look at the catalyst. I'll look at all the characteristics of the trade. to kind of line up in my head, okay, like, this was set up, right? Sometimes, you're trading and after the fact, there's a lot of information. And so sometimes I'll just ask myself, okay, like, but this was really set up, right? Like, how set up was this? Like, did I not even realize how set up this trade was? This was a big move. I should have seen this coming, right? And then I'll look at the area where I thought my entry should be. And if I have a video of the tape, I'll go and watch that. If I don't, I'll just look at the chart. But I'll start to ask myself, okay, like, how much, if I entered here, what was I really risking? Like, where should it not trade to? And therefore, like, how big could I have gotten risking X amount? And if I did get that big, where would my scales be reasonably? We're not just saying we're gonna like bottom and top tick stuff, but like reasonably, where would my scales be? And how much better could I have done on this trade if I was seeing it really, really well?
And then there's one further step that you can take in this. And so we've all talked about, all of these habits that we're doing are more just to kind of contextually set the right stage. We're really fortunate to work with a couple different programs, and there's some other ones too. But you can actually go back and retrade that setup or setups like it. And traders on our desk use Trading Sim. They use Thinkorswim on demand, and they actually will go back and they will retrade those exact setups, doing it the exact way that they wish they would have done it, or that they did do it if they felt like they traded it really well. And the reason is because that just gives you extra reps making the right trading decisions at the right time with the right information. Because as much as you're learning this setup, it will happen again and again and again. And there will always be something a little bit new and a little bit different to it. And that's the best part. So that's why you have to set the context. Because if you don't have that context around it, when that new or different piece of information comes in, you won't know whether to overvalue it or maybe even undervalue it. You won't really understand, like, hey, listen, is the price action trading in a way that, hey, that's okay for that little pullback to happen in this trade? Or is that going too fast and I need to take some off because, what if it, that's just capitulatory? You need to understand those things. And a lot of times you actually need to get the reps in and experiencing them. So using a program like Trading Sim or using Thinkorswim on demand, those are great ways to just retrade and retrade and retrade and retrade. And we're fortunate there are a handful of other programs out there, but those are just the two that are most widely used on the desk. So we figured we'd share those. Just to wrap up, we're going to cover the cycle of trade development on our desk one more time. It starts with observe. You see someone doing something well that makes sense to you, or maybe you see something in your book of charts that it sort of makes sense to you. The goal here is just to see it. That's all. Just see it. Just be able to see what makes sense to you. The next step is to learn. You want to ask yourself and others questions about the trade. You want to study the answers you're given to kind of build context around the idea you have observed, right? The goal here is just to build the context around that idea. Then you get into the fun stuff for us, the filtering. The goal here is to be specific and identify your edge. What are the really good trading decisions to make? What are the factors that Garrett pointed out or might be existent in other trades that actually gives you a really good trade and allows you to make those trading decisions? After you've filtered everything out, you go to adopt. Right? Your goal is to design how to trade it properly and start trading it properly. To design how the trade should look from a context level and all the way through to an execution level, and then just begin to trade that. The goal at this stage is just consistency, right? Consistently make good decisions in that trade. And the final step is to advance the strategy. The goal here is to isolate your A+ setups and understand how to dynamically use your risk in order to make sure that you're actually making the most in the best opportunities for you.
So now you know the number one trading mistake plaguing most traders. Avoid this one mistake and you've considerably upped your chances of becoming consistently profitable. But avoiding mistakes isn't the only thing you need to do to succeed as a trader. You also need to know the specific trading rules for the three main types of trades. Without knowing these rules, you won't be able to differentiate between trade types and you'll end up executing incorrectly. Good execution is essential for profitable trading. So be sure to click on the video appearing on your screen now to learn this vital skill.